DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're joined by Jeremy Scahill. His latest piece in The Nation is called Why is President Obama Keeping a Journalist in Prison in Yemen? And we're joined by Mohamed Abdel Dayem, coordinator of the Middle East and North Africa program at the Committee to Protect Journalists. Talk about meeting Shaye for the first time. When did you meet him?
This was July 2010. I was actually in Yemen to do some research on the constitutionality or lack thereof of this special tribunal. So I was not there to meet Shaye per se. He was one of many people I was going to talk to. And this then turned out to be just 2 nights before he was kidnapped, abducted off of the street. And immediately I could tell this was a very smart journalist and a journalist who really was willing to put a lot on the line to get the tough stories, because everybody can get the easy stories. And that was my initial impression of him. And I was in Yemen for a little less than 2 weeks, and I saw him right before getting arrested. And then I also happened to be at Al Jazeera right when he was released, and he called him.
The first time.
Correct. And he called him. He said, "I'm on my way out of prison. I'm going to go home and put on a different jacket. This one has blood on it. I'll be there in 20 minutes." And he came and he spilled the beans on the air. So I
spilled the beans by saying what?
By saying what had happened and what they told him to do, and you may not talk about this, and you're making us look bad. And really, it had nothing to do with the U.S. He was making the Yemeni government look bad. He was on Al Jazeera frequently, and he revealed how the Yemen's counterterrorism tactics were just a failure in more ways than one, and how if you bombed a village and you killed one Al-Qaeda guy and 10 families, that was probably not a good thing in the long run. It wasn't going to fix the problem of Al-Qaeda on the long run. And he said that, and he said it very clearly and openly, and that made him a target for the Yemeni government.
And when he was subsequently arrested, and then his actual trial, can you talk about the procedures of that trial itself?
Yeah, the trial does not pass the laugh test at all, and the court does not pass the laugh test. And actually, in my research, I could not locate a single case that was tried in this specialized criminal tribunal. You can just tell by the name that this is not going to be a serious affair. I could not find a single case that met even remotely like fair trial standards. So there's no transparency. There's no proper appeals process. Lawyers are deprived of a lot of the files. Things are slid in last minute. It just failed to meet those standards. And this is not just my opinion, but this was observed by every single person who attended these sessions when they were allowed to attend.
See, this is what's important to realize here. What's important to realize here, and what Mohamed is saying, is that on one side of this, you have major media freedom organizations. You have major human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. You have every legal and human rights organization in Yemen. You have very prominent foreign correspondents who've spoken out on this case, some of whom knew Abdulelah Haider Shaye. So they're on one side of it, condemning his trial as a sham, talking about who he actually was as a journalist. And on the other side of it, you have the dictatorship of Ali Abdullah Saleh, a specialized criminal tribunal set up to go after journalists, and the White House. And so President Obama is the single person keeping that man in prison right now, because even the dictator, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was prepared to release him. And it was a phone call, not from one of Obama's people, from Obama himself, that kept him in prison. And so when I called the State Department, one of the things I said is, what is the evidence that you have to support your contention that Abdulelah Haider Shaye is a terrorist or is affiliated with Al-Qaeda? And they said, we don't have anything to say on that right now. So that's how much of a sham this is. So anyone who wants to say, well, Obama must know what he's doing, needs to realize that you're taking a position against major human rights organizations and journalist organizations against the United States, which is currently engaged in its biggest crackdown on whistleblowers in history. So just be clear on what side of the line you're on if you're a journalist when you say that.
Jeremy, I want to get all these clips in, these interviews that you did while you were in Yemen, because they haven't been aired before. Let's turn to Kamal Sharaf, the Yemeni political cartoonist. Here he describes why his friend, the journalist Abdulelah Haider Shaye, was seen as such a threat.
لأنه أيضا كان يركز على موضوع مهم أن صالح يستنزف الأمريكيين بعذر القاعدة.
He was focusing on how Saleh was using the Al-Qaeda card to gain more money and logistical support from the United States.
هذا الشيء كان يغضب النظام.
This angered the regime. Now the U.S. realizes that the issue of Al-Qaeda was exaggerated to gain money. This issue pushed the regime to kidnap him 1 month before the arrest.
وخطفه من الشارع. كنا أيضا مع بعض. أنا نزلت السوبر ماركت.
He was kidnapped from the street. We were together when I went into a supermarket. When I came back, I saw armed people grabbing him and taking him into a car. He was arrested for hours and released after midnight at dawn.
لوعيد لإغراء أيضا أنه هذا الموضوع سيدمر حياتك هكذا قال له أحد المحققين.
He was threatened and they tried to persuade him. They told him that this issue would destroy his life. One of the interrogators told him, "We will destroy your life if you keep on talking about this issue." Abdullah was the only person critical in speaking the truth about Al-Qaeda. So he had significance in the Arab world and in America.
كما قلت لك أربك النظام. عبد الله استمر في كشف الحقائق ليس حبا لا في القاعدة ولا في الأمريكيين لكنه آمن أنه رجل يقول الحقيقة.
Abdullah continued to reveal facts not for the sake of the Americans or Al-Qaeda, but because he believed that he was saying the truth and that his journalistic role was to reveal the facts, to reveal the real relation between Al-Qaeda and America and the regime.
When Yemeni journalist Shaya was arrested a second time, Yemeni security forces also detained his friend Kamal Sharaf. Kamal, describe what happened.
فرأيت جنود لأول مرة أشوفهم هاماتهم.
I saw soldiers I had never seen before. They were tall and heavy. They reminded me of American Marines. Then I knew that they were from the counterterrorism unit.
يمتلكون أيضا بنادق بالليزرية حديثة.
They had modern laser guns. They were wearing American-type uniform. They said they wanted us to come with them. I asked, "What are we accused of?" They said, "You will find out."
في نفس الوقت كانت أيضا قوة أخرى تحاصر عبد الإله في منزله واقتحمت أيضا البيت بالنسبة لعبد الإله لأنه رفض المجيء. أنا تجاوبت معهم ومضيت.
At the same time, there were some soldiers surrounding Abdullah's house. Abdullah refused to go out, so they raided his house, took him by force, beat him, broke his teeth, and treated him cruelly.
عملوا بقسوة شديدة. وصلنا إلى سجون الأمن القومي المدعوم أمريكيا أيضا والمشرف عليه الأمريكيون مغمضي العينين.
We were both taken blindfolded and handcuffed to the National Security Prison, which is supported by the Americans.
وصلنا إلى قبو تحت الأرض. تم تسجيل معلوماتنا.
We were treated badly and then were placed in underground solitary confinement. They logged in our details. I was in dark solitary confinement for half an hour. I didn't know what was going on. We were kept for about 30 days during Ramadan in the National Security Prison where we were continuously interrogated.
That was the political cartoonist Kamal Sharaf, Jeremy, who you were talking to.
He was. This just shows the climate that exists in Yemen about press freedom. Kamal Sharaf was arrested allegedly because he had drawn an offensive political cartoon of President Saleh, and because he was expressing his opinions about the Saleh government's war against a minority population in the north of Yemen called the Houthis. So he's arrested, and we're showing now a cartoon that Kamal Sharaf drew of his friend Abdulelah Haider Shaye, who's in a prison that consists of bars making up the U.S. flag, and then there's an older white man standing next to him holding a key, and that is the U.S. ambassador to Yemen, Gerald Firestein, who has been militantly in favor of keeping Abdulelah Haider Shaye in prison. In fact, when Iona Craig, the great correspondent in Yemen who writes for the Times of London, questioned the U.S. ambassador recently and brought up Shaya's case, Firestein literally laughed in her face. and said he's a terrorist, and if other Yemeni journalists don't do what he did, they have nothing to fear from us, from the Americans. And what he did, and this is how everyone in Yemen sees it, was interview al-Awlaki, interview al-Qaeda people, and expose that the U.S. had killed a bunch of women and children in a strike that they celebrated as a major victory against al-Qaeda. So, you have Kamal Sharaf arrested, and they only let him out of prison, this, gulag he was put in, when he agreed not to draw any more pictures of Ali Abdullah Saleh. So they took away his voice in return for his so-called freedom. Since Saleh is gone now, Kamal Sharaf has started speaking out again and writing out again, but this is the climate of fear that's there. And these are the people, the government, the systems that President Obama is supporting by keeping journalists in prison and continuing to support Saleh after Saleh in Yemen, which is what the government is there now.
And Mohammed, the irony, the contradiction of the Obama administration trying to pressure other governments to free journalists, but here actually pressuring a government to keep a journalist in prison?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. government has a record of pressuring authoritarian regimes to release journalists who are being held unjustly. This has happened many times and many times across this region. And then the problem is when you look at Yemen, we have this court that was designed and put in place only so that you can bludgeon journalists into submission. And this idea of a pardon after being convicted by this court, every single journalist that has been convicted by this court was eventually pardoned. So they sentence you, they send a message to everybody else, and then you go to prison for a month or 2 or 3 or 4, and then when it's Eid or some religious holiday or something, they go, okay, pardons for everybody, and everybody just leaves. And it's supposed to be a slap on the wrist and don't forget who's boss here. Except in this case, it's spiraled totally out of control.
I want to go back for the final clip to Shaya's attorney, Abdurrahman Barman, describing how Shaya was beaten and psychologically tortured by Yemeni security forces.
Abdulelah Haider received many threats from the security forces over the phone, and when he was kidnapped for the first time, they beat him and interrogated him concerning his statements and the analysis on the Al-Mujalla issue and the U.S. war against terrorism here in Yemen. I think he was arrested based on a request from the American government. At the time of his arrest, they beat him, even though he did not resist them. He was asked by soldiers to come, and he went with them. They took him from his house, and when they were in his yard, the soldiers beat him cruelly using the butts of their guns. And one of them bit him in the chest, and the scar was still there when we met him.
وضع في حمام ضيق ومعفن فترة 5 أيام.
In prison, he was not physically tortured, but he was psychologically tortured. He was put in a dirty bathroom for 5 days. He was told that all of his friends and family members had left him, that he was alone, and that no one supported his case. He was tortured by false information. In the first session of the prosecution, I noticed that one of Abdullah's teeth was extracted and that another one was broken, in addition to some scars on his chest. That was after 25 days of detention. There were a lot of scars on his chest. We have noted that in the general prosecution minutes, and we requested a referral to a forensic doctor to prove the torture on his body. He was referred, but we have not received a copy of the doctor's report, and we have not been allowed to make a copy for his case file so far.
Abdulelah Haider Shaye's attorney, Abdurrahman Barman. We just have 30 seconds, Jeremy, but a couple things. Saleh was just in the United States. Clearly, the White House had total access to him as he stayed at the Waldorf Astoria and was protested.
The Ritz-Carlton.
At the Ritz-Carlton, and was protested repeatedly by Yemenis outside. So he's in close contact with them, though he returned to his country and he's not president anymore. And also a question about WikiLeaks and what it has revealed. I mean,
WikiLeaks confirmed the kinds of things that Abdulelah Haider Shaye was alleging, and that the U.S. and Yemeni governments had such a problem with being revealed, namely that the U.S. has this covert war in Yemen, and that it's actively conspired with the Yemeni government to cover up the American role, and that Yemen often takes credit for operations that are U.S. operations. The final point I would make about this is that local journalists around the world, and in these cases many of them are Arab journalists that no one's ever heard of. They get killed more than anyone else. They get wounded more than anyone else. They get imprisoned by these dictatorships more than anyone else. Without them, if their voices are silenced, we will not get anywhere near the complete picture of what's happening in these war zones, in these dictatorships. You see the bravery of citizen journalists in Syria. Abdulelah Haider Shaye was a brave journalist. He just happened to be on the wrong side of history in the eyes of the U.S. And his crime seems to be interviewing the wrong people and having the audacity to publish another side of the story. That should be unacceptable to all journalists. His cause should be just as important as Roxana Saberi, who was arrested in Iran, and a huge international outcry was made for her. What about Abdulelah Haider Shaye? He deserves the support of journalists around the world. He needs to be released from prison.
I want to thank you both very much for being with us. Jeremy Scahill, you can go to The Nation for his latest piece, Why is President Obama Keeping a Journalist in Prison in Yemen? And Mohamed Abdel Dayem, coordinator of the Middle East and North Africa program at the Committee to Protect Journalists. This is